Okay, we're ready to begin now, thank you. Right, hello, good evening and welcome to the Muslim Debate Initiative's public event, Jihad on Trial. Is Jihad Justifiable? Such a title reflects the modern debate on Islam and the current global conflicts between certain Western powers in the Muslim lands. Thus, the jihad argument has become one of the most prominent points of contention between Islam and the West. Both sides seek to position the argument from their viewpoint. Western governments and media, at times, depict Muslim resistance fighters as barbaric, prone to wanton violence, uncivilized, and spurred on to war by an uncaring religion in the name of a foreign-sounding god. On the other side, many Muslims view jihad as the noble endeavour to fight oppression and bring justice, used in the modern world to counter the large number of repeated incursions from the armies of Western powers. So tonight we ask, is jihad a legitimate means of resistance to oppression? Or is it merely religiously sanctioned violence against all and any non-Muslims? Tonight we have brought speakers from both sides of the spectrum to present their arguments, after which you decide. My name is Paul Williams. This event is hosted by the Muslim Debate Initiative, MDI for short, which is an intellectual, political, theological initiative formed by experienced Muslim researchers, debaters and speakers, aimed at encouraging inter-community debate, discussion and dialogue. MDI believes that only through frank and open discussion and debate, leaving political correctness firmly outside the door, can a deeper understanding be gained, relations between different communities be improved, and hopefully the breaking down of prejudices and false conceptions. It is with this in mind that we invite our honoured guests to come and present to you today's event. Now, on my right is Sami Zaatari, who is an experienced speaker for Muslim Christian apologetics. He has been in the field of Islamic apologetics for the past 3 years, writing hundreds of responses to Christian polemics, as well as articles in defence of Islam. Sami's activities then progressed to public moderated debates about 2 years ago. He is currently completing his creative writing degree in London. Sami has been involved and engaged in these debates in the United States as well as here in the UK. He has debated numerous apologists, including Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries, Professor of Philosophy David Wood of Fordham University in New York, as well as Rob Scott of St Helens Anglican Church here in London, and many others as well. Sami's interests include Muslim apologetics, as I mentioned, politics and current affairs, theist and atheist polemics, and Islamic studies. And Sami currently maintains a much renowned web resource for Christian Muslim apologetics, and you can view this at www.muslim-responses.com. And on my left, we have Alan Craig. He is the leader of the Christian People's Alliance. He also leads the Christian People's Alliance Councillor on Newham Borough Council here in London. Alan was educated at Newcastle University and Manchester Business School. In a varied career, he has been chief executive of an international group of manufacturing companies employing 2,500 people. He converted to Christianity in his late 20s, and Alan's faith has become central to his life. He left business management and moved to the East End of London and went on to become live-in warden of an aftercare home for young offenders on their release from prison. Subsequently, between 1995 and 2004, he was director of the Mayflower Family Centre in Canning Town, London, in one of the most deprived communities, according to the London Research Centre. He has been elected councillor for Canning Town South Ward in May 2002, becoming the sole opposition member on Newham Council, facing 59 Labour councillors and a Labour executive mayor. With his wife Sally, stepsons Luke and Jake, and his daughters Louise and Charlie, Alan is dedicated to pursuing his vision of public life that is inspired by a Christian understanding of the teachings of Jesus Christ. He also speaks regularly on television and radio. is campaigning on newer issues, such as the proposed large casino, housing generation, Labour's attempt to wreck the community Queen's Market, the Excel Arms Fair, and the proposed Olympics mega mosque, has drawn the attention of national and international news media. Right, the event this evening will proceed as follows. There will be an opening presentation by both speakers. This will be approximately 25 minutes, and Alan on my left will open with that. Then there will be a probably much needed break for 5 minutes, give or take 3 or 4 minutes. Then after that there will be rebuttals of about 10 minutes each. And then it's your opportunity to ask questions or make comments. And then they're usually, we invite you to stand up and ask a question, but if you would like to submit a written question, you're very welcome to do so. And then after that there will be a summary from each of the speakers for about 5 minutes each. I'd like to explain about the rules for this evening. No one shall shout, jeer, or disrupt the speakers while they are speaking. Anyone who wishes to make comments should save them for later during the audience participation session. Applause is allowed at the end of each speaker's discussion. And we would like to remind everyone that in accordance with the Islamic principles of Muslim Debate Initiative and the commonly understood principles of etiquette of discussion, that we should respect everyone's right to hold opinions and express them, even the most unpalatable ones, as long as they are expressed sincerely and for intellectually serious purposes, and not gratuitously and in a disrespectful fashion. And we urge everyone to leave political correctness at the door, and no one will be offended by the expression of your beliefs and opinions. And we hold that only through a real open discussion can the truth be found. And we hope you enjoy this evening and gain a better understanding of the arguments proposed by both speakers. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to present the first speaker, Alan.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here with you. I'd like to honour Muslim Debate Initiative for these debates. I think there's a third one I've been to here. It's the first time I've been up on the platform. But thank you to you, Paul, and Abdullah and the other members of the team for setting this up. I remember last time I came, Paul was in the chair, and he said, please leave political correctness at the door. My heart lifted as I walked through the door last. He said it twice tonight, and I really enjoy that, because as someone who tries to do his bit from a Christian angle, a Christian standpoint in public life, and suffers from the attacks of political correctness, it's a delight to be here where we don't have to worry about such things. So I would like to honour you for holding this debate. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to say, because there's going to be some contention between myself and Sami tonight, obviously, that's the way it's set up, over an issue related right to the heart of, as I understand it, Islamic thinking and Islamic ideology. I would like to say that I would like to honour Muslims as well. So it's slightly regrettable when we're in debates like this that actually we're standing one against the other and debating and confronting one another in argument. That needs to be done, and when we're pursuing ideas, indeed that's right. But I also would like to say that I would like to honour all those who follow the Muslim faith here, the Islamic faith here, and also indeed I have suggested to Abdullah that at some stage it would be nice to stand on the same side, perhaps a Christian and a Muslim, debating with atheists or something like that, so once we'd be together rather than opposing one another. I didn't realise when I said that I would debate with Sami that I was going to be debating with such a superstar, this experienced in Muslim apologetics who goes off to the States and so on. Sami, I take my hat off to you. I'm afraid I'm not quite the superstar at such things. It's only my second such attempt at Christian apologetics in this context and debating Muslim and Christian issues. However, I'm not fazed by that whatsoever, because I believe it's the material and the facts and the ideas that will come through, not the skills and the experience of the speakers. At least I hope so. That's what I'm aiming to do. I will, of course, be approaching this topic from a Christian angle. I can do nothing else. I'm a Christian to my core. My Christian faith is the essence of my being. That's why I'm put on this planet, so I can do nothing else. But of course, it would be nice if there are others who look at it, others may look at it from other angles, not only clearly from a Muslim angle, but interesting to see what atheists and agnostics and Hindus and Sikhs and some Buddhists might make of this plank, this central idea in Islam. And as we come on to this, we need to define what jihad is about. And I do have come to recognise that it's really an umbrella term. It's a fairly elastic term. It covers a multitude of sins. Excuse me, that wasn't a very good expression. It covers a multitude of ideas and concepts in there. But I do understand also that it is a sensitive topic, that for some people, for some Muslims, they say that Islam is the sixth pillar of Islam. Jihad is the sixth pillar of Islam, and it's right at the heart, therefore, of Islamic understanding of their faith, whether they accept it's the sixth pillar or not. But as I've looked at it, and as I've studied jihad, it's quite clear that it is used in many different ways. Basically, it seems to me, that I understand, I'm sure Sami will put me right if I got it wrong, but it's a struggle in the way of Allah. That, I think, is what it means, and it means it in very, very many different ways. Firstly, it means it in terms of one's own personal struggle, getting yourself under control, controlling your temple, controlling your passions, your own personal piety, your own personal self-control, resisting personal temptation. That, I think, is, at least amongst some, seems to be known also as greater jihad or higher jihad. A second area which seems to be referred to quite a lot is jihad in terms of public service, in terms of pursuing social justice, in terms of political activity, in terms of writing and debating and arguing. Indeed, some people, perhaps some people here, would say that tonight is an opportunity for jihad by debate. And it seems to be there's quite a lot of that, and some people I see call it a sort of soft jihad. Organising, another way, organising in society, organising in the community can be seen as jihad. It's really interesting to me, as I've studied this a bit over the last few weeks, that it seems that this sort of jihad, be it the personal controlling your passions and resisting temptation, or the social jihad out there in the community doing it and debating, seems to be the one that, at least amongst academic circles here in the West, seems to be the one that the academics, the liberal academics, seem to concentrate on. I mean, people like Karen Armstrong, whom you'll have heard of, and many, many, many others. They all seem to think this is actually what jihad is about. They follow the idea that this is greater jihad, higher jihad, and this is what it's about. But that is not what we're going to be debating tonight, no matter what all these many academics, these secular liberal academics in academic institutions both in Europe and in the United States say. I can say that's not what we're going to be debating tonight because the poster itself gave me the clue. Here you see the poster which the Muslim Debating Initiative put out, and you'll see a submachine gun right there on the front end, Jihad on Trial. So clearly the Muslim Debating Initiative doesn't think this is about me and my personal struggle to control my temper or to control my passions or whatever. They don't think it's that. Secondly, I was reading from a guy who converted to Christianity. He was very much involved lived all his life in the Middle East. He converted to Christianity and felt that he had to leave the Middle East, the country where he was living. And he said when he went to the States, he was amazed, utterly amazed to hear all these academics going on about jihad being your own personal struggle. He said that simply isn't understood in the Middle East. You mentioned jihad in the Middle East, and indeed elsewhere. Everyone knows what you're talking about. It's talking about this, it's talking about machine guns, it's talking about military jihad, it's talking about violent jihad and so on. And lastly, the reason why we need to look at this, of course, if we go back to the roots and the foundations of the faith, we look at the life of Muhammad himself. He himself was not only a prophet, an Islamic prophet of Islam, but he was also a military commander. And you'll know from his life better than I, no doubt, that he himself was involved in various battles and raids and so on. He personally was there participating. He sent his own troops out. So he was a military commander. He understood what it was to fight and so on. And indeed, as you'll know, if you go to the Topkapi Museum, Palace Museum in Istanbul, you'll see his sword there. So he's very different in that sense from people like Jesus Christ, who never held a sword in his life, as we know. And indeed, the way of non-violence of many others, like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and so on. Muhammad was not. He was out there, he was doing it, he was believing in it. Now it seems to me as I've studied this that jihad can be effectively divided into two. It can be separated into two. Defensive jihad and offensive jihad. And I'm well aware that not all Muslims accept this division between the two, between defensive and offensive. I happened to see, I was reading just earlier, a statement, if I can just illustrate those who oppose this, Muslims who oppose this concept. I was reading Sayyid Maududi, And he says, just quoting from what he says, this dichotomy is artificial and misleading. He says, if you carefully consider the explanation given above, and that's in his book, it will become clear that the terms offensive and defensive, which are usually applied to definition warfare, are not at all applicable in the case of Islamic jihad. These terms are relevant only in the context of wars between nations and countries, for technically speaking, the terms attack and defence can only be used with reference to country or a nation. And so he goes on. I won't bother to read more from that. So there are those within Islam, it seems, who do not accept the difference between offensive and defensive jihad, military jihad. And I'm not going to deal with that tonight, the difference, because it seems to me that the things which I will in a minute be saying about offensive jihad would apply to Maududi's concept of all jihad as well. But I do want to say about defensive jihad, this is, as I understand it, and no doubt many of you are more experts than I am, but I would like to just read that. It seems to me from my own reading, my own understanding, it comes from the Quran, and it comes from Quran Surah 2, if I can just read it. Yes, here we go, Surah 2. Ayah 190, fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. That's a good one. Do not transgress limits, for Allah loveth not transgressors. Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, and there are other references as well in there. But this is the clue in there, that actually those who fight you, those who are after you, and this is effectively self-defense, jihad in self-defense. Quite often when I discuss this, when I have on occasions discussed this with Muslims, they will say, well, when your home is attacked, what do you do? When your wife is about to be raped, what do you do? It's self-defense of your home, your possessions, your community, your society, your country, whatever. Somebody is attacking you, whoever they are, and you have the right to defend yourself. We've had personal defense, personal jihad, we've had social, if I can call that, or political jihad, and we've had defensive jihad. And I would like to say that on all these three, in many ways I have no problem. I have no problem in all of these. I think they are, in some ways, in terms of your own personal jihad, your own personal control of it, it's something admirable. Christians are well aware of that ourselves in terms of controlling yourself, giving yourself to God, following a pietistic approach to life. We're well aware of that, so there's nothing wrong with that. Similar with political activity. Encourage people to get involved in political activity. And defending yourself is a perfectly natural thing to do. Not everybody does. There's quite a strong theme within Christianity of pacifism, following the New Testament, the model of Jesus, for those who have pacifism, and they say they would always turn the other cheek, no matter what happens. But nonetheless, self-defense, defending your children, defending your home, defending your society, your community, and so on, is perfectly acceptable. And it's acceptable to atheists too. It's not just Christians and Muslims, but also atheists who don't believe in God. All those three aspects of jihad, atheists could accept, and agnostics and so on can accept as reasonable. But this isn't true when we come on to the last one, and this is, I think, where Islam really has a problem: offensive jihad. Here we now move into new territory, because as I said, up until now it's been okay. We've been all right with it. But now we move into others, and I want to start off by quoting, to try and define what we're talking about. I want to quote again from the Quran, and I want to quote from, you'll probably guess which one I'm going to go to. I'm going to go to Surah 9, and I'm going to go to Ayah 29, so I can get that. Here we go. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor in the last day, nor hold that forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Prophet, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. And this too is followed from the Hadith as well, the same thing. But I won't bother to give the example from the Hadith because time gets short, but also there's lots of examples defining this separate form, and it's actually offensive, is when Islam is going on the offence and you're fighting in order to establish Islam. And this is the issue here. This is what I think actually it's a real issue for Muslims and a real issue for Islam. It's the Achilles heel, because it actually is about inviting Muslims to propagate, promote, progress Islam, to establish and expand Islam in the name of Allah when using the sword, or whatever happens to be the weapon. And I think this, I think, frankly, in my view, I think it is both intrinsic to Islam, it's right at the heart of Islam, but also it's not accepted But it is intrinsic because we know that's himself, what Muhammad himself did. As mentioned earlier, he was a military commander, and he established Islam all over the Arabian Peninsula, if necessary, and often by the use of the sword. Maybe not him personally, but by his own troops and under his orders. And we also know that not only that, from Muhammad himself, but when he died under the first four caliphs, and then also, say, for the first 100 years, this extraordinary, almost unique expansion of Islam, whooshed straight across to India and across to Spain. And all of that, no way could that be seen to be defending Islam, which was basically established in the Arabian Peninsula, but as expanding and establishing Islam right the way across from India. What have the Hindus ever had anything to do with Islam? Nothing. But Islam had a lot to do with the Hindus. And there is no doubt whatsoever of the offensive, expansionist, imperialist ambitions behind this. One I quite often like to quote, because I think it's really quite instructive. Can I just quote to you from a guy, you won't know what you, or the non-Muslims here won't know you know of this, but his name is called Tariq ibn Ziyad. Now he's the guy who gave his name to Gibraltar. Tariq, Gibraltar. And he was the guy in 711, or some people say 712. He took an army of Muslims across from North Africa into Spain, landed just by what we now call Gibraltar. He landed there, and he did what one or two other commanders have done in the past. He burnt the boats. He burnt all the boats, so there was no way these Islamic troops were going to go back to North Africa. They were going to stay. He burnt the boats, and then he gave a speech, which is a famous speech. And I'm just going to quote one or two bits for it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about here. So there is absolutely no doubt what we're talking about in terms of offensive, expansionist, imperialist Islam. Remember that if you, and this is a quote from him, remember, he said in his speech to his troops, remember that if you suffer a few moments in patience, you will afterward enjoy supreme delight. Do not imagine that your fate can be separated from mine, this is the general speaking, and rest assured that if you fall, I shall perish with you, or avenge you. You have heard that in this country there are a large number of ravishingly beautiful Greek maidens. This is Spain we're talking about. Their graceful forms are draped in sumptuous gowns on which gleam pearls, coral, and purest gold, and they live in the palaces of royal kings. The commander of the true believers, that's the Caliph, has chosen you for this attack from among all his Arab warriors, and he promises that you shall become his comrades and shall hold the rank of kings in this country. Such is his confidence in your intrepidity. Such is his confidence in your intrepidity. The one fruit, listen to this, the one fruit which he desires to obtain from your bravery is that the word of Allah shall be exalted in this country, and that the true religion shall be established here. The spoils, the booty, will belong to yourselves. Now this, it seems to me, is the real issue. This is what I'm going to be putting to Sami. How can you, under any circumstance, justify this? Here you have countries, maybe across in India, right across to India, or right across North Africa, minding their own business, getting on with their own lives. Over the horizon appear these Muslim soldiers and troops, and they are there to establish the word of Allah, to establish the, quotes, true faith. The booty was theirs, but what the Caliph wanted was Islam to be established there. I have to say myself, I really struggle with this. I really struggle with this indeed, and with due respect to yourselves, I simply don't understand, and I'm looking forward to hearing Sami defend this. But in my view, Islam stands condemned, because this itself is right at the heart of the faith. There is no such similar thing, as I understand it, in any other faith, certainly not my own faith, whereby actually you impose, you expand, you colonize in the name of your God. It shows, if I'm honest, it shows Islam up as a religion that actually is about power, control, and domination. And some of you all know that actually when the Islamic troops appear at a town or a city which they're going to take over, excuse me a moment. They separate they look at the opponents, they look at the enemy in two ways. Firstly, they look at the Christians and the Jews, and I believe the Zoroastrians as well. People like myself, I'm offered three options. I can either accept Islam and convert to Islam. I can pay the jizya tax, and I can feel myself and show myself subdued, as we read in that verse in the Quran, or I can be killed. Those are the three offers which are made to me by the Muslim troops as I sit in my town, and I sit in my city, and the Muslim troops appear over the horizon. If I don't happen to be a Christian or a Jew or a Zoroastrian, I have two options, not three. I either convert to Islam or I'm killed. I simply don't understand how anyone can say or begin to think that this is what a religion is about. It seems to me that religion, faith, spirituality is nothing of the sort. These things are a matter of the heart. Belief in God is a matter of the heart, of the soul, of the spirit. It's not about imposing yourself with a sword. It's not about the external and the interior. And therefore propagating religion by force, in my view, is not acceptable. What is religion? What is faith? What is belief? Jesus himself said the two great commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul and your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. Those are the two great commandments. And that loving the Lord your God with all your heart is a personal thing. It's a heart thing. It's a decision thing for you and for me to decide. However you understand God, to decide in your heart. And you cannot be coerced into it. It's a willing thing. I look at my own conversion, and what happened at my own conversion. I remember the very night when finally I decided to become a Christian, aged 29. Nobody asked me to do it, nobody persuaded me to do it, certainly nobody coerced me into doing it. I was alone, in my bedroom. And suddenly, at last, I realised that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's true. I realised he was the root truth of the universe. And I got up, I was excited, I was like electric for me. I got up, but nobody coerced me to see that. And I realised that I was going to give my life, my total commitment to Jesus Christ. No sword. There wasn't even my parents telling me what to do. There was no friends doing it. It was me alone. It seems to me that's what it is. And then I realised I was in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I could talk to him. I could walk through him. And I do now. That's what I do. But it's a matter of the heart. Nobody's standing there with a sword and saying, you're going to become a Christian.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think this is a real Achilles heel to Islam. The fact that you've got this, you can actually believe that faith is something to do with this, I think is a real problem. What are the most beautiful relationships? Shouldn't your relationship with your Maker be the most beautiful relationship? I've got 2 young daughters. Perhaps the most special time that I ever have with my daughters, say they're both aged 8 and 7, is when voluntarily, willingly, perhaps I'm sitting watching television, I'm reading a book, and my little daughter walks into the room, and she comes and sits on my lap, and she says to me, nobody tells her to, she comes and sits on my lap, she looks up in my eyes, says, Daddy, I love you. That's what she says. That's worth gold, that's worth everything, to me, personally. That is a relationship. That is love. That is between a father and a daughter. And if that is a relationship between a father and a daughter, how much more so the relationship between you and me and our Maker? Should it not be one of love? Should our God not look down on us and us willingly give our lives to him? Is that not actually what the faith is about? But no. Islam says no. Islam says you build empires, and you can if you want to. You can build empires, you can colonise territories, you can change governments, you can take over societies. But please don't call that faith. Please don't call that religion. Please don't call that belief in God. Please don't call that a relationship in God. Certainly from the Christian understanding, it is nothing of the sort. Now briefly, I just want to go on to one more thing, related thing, and I want to go on to the whole question of martyrdom. And this seems to be really quite important. You see, those that die in the way of Allah, die in the way of jihad, become martyrs. And they have a special privilege. They go straight to paradise. Straight to paradise they go home. And Christians understand about martyrs. In fact, many people have a saying in the Christian church that actually the church is built, that the blood of martyrs is a seed of the church. It's that where there's martyrdom going on, the church flourishes most. And when there isn't martyrdom, when it's actually fat and comfortable, actually the church begins to wither up and die. So we understand about martyrdom. But we don't understand about this paradise that these martyrs, Islamic martyrs, seem to go straight into. It's extraordinary. You'll excuse me if I don't really read too much from here, but perhaps I'll just read one. Time is getting short. I've only got 3 minutes. I've only got. Perhaps I'll just read one. Perhaps I can do that. Just read one section. Yes, I'm going to read from Surah 76, a description of paradise. Okay? This is what paradise is like. And because they were patient and constant, he will reward them with a garden and garments of silk. And reclining in the garment on raised thrones, they will see there neither sun's excessive heat nor the moon's excessive cold. And the shades of the garden will come low over them, and the bunches of fruit there will hang low in humility. And amongst them will be passed round vessels of silver and goblets of crystal clear. They'll be given to drink there a cup of wine mixed with zanjabil, a fountain there, and round them will serve youths of perpetual freshness. If thou see them, they would think them scattered pearls, and so on. This extraordinary, to a Christian eyes, this extraordinary view of paradise, where these martyrs go, these jihadists go if they're killed in the way of fighting in the way of Allah. This extraordinary carnal, physical, material place. I mean, it's just extraordinary to me. I couldn't understand. Surely, the Christian, in your heart of hearts, what you want to do when you die, what you want to do to heaven, is come into a relationship with your Maker. The Christian understanding is that we'll all be there with the angels and the archangels, the whole company of heaven. You'll be there surrounding the throne of grace, worshipping for thousands of years. But no, according to this, you'll have 70 virgins who'll be looking after you, and your wives. Your wives can come along as well. You'll have 70 virgins. You'll have all this wine. You'll have all this fruit. You'll be lying on these couches and so on. This extraordinarily, almost orgy of activity going on, and this is supposed to be paradise. Ladies and gentlemen, especially my Muslim friends, this is not what it's really like. It's extraordinarily carnal. It's extraordinarily physical. And my challenge to Sami is to say, do you actually believe this, Sami? Do you actually believe when you die, if you become a martyr and you die, this is what you're going to get? Isn't this just boys' talk in the pub? Excuse me, you won't know what a pub is like, but isn't this boys' talk in the playground? Whoa, all these virgins, all this booze, all this wine, yeah? Isn't this a good thing? But Sami, when you get down to it, alone, in your bedroom or there, and you come face to face and you want to know, face to face with your God, you want to know what is eternity going to be like. Do you really want all this? I haven't got time, I'd love to expand on it, but I've got about 20 seconds. I've got other questions, but this is my point. I believe Islam lets itself down by having this offensive jihad. I don't really think it's defendable under any circumstance. I look forward to what Sami says. The rest I can take, the rest I can understand, but not this. This is not faith, this is not religion, this is not a relationship with the Almighty. This is carnal, this is physical, this is warfare, this is the sword, and it's not for us. Thank you.
Okay, is the sound good?
Or maybe not. Do you want to use this one?
Okay, can you hear me properly now? Okay, thanks. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like to thank Alan for his presentation. Now, during this debate, I'm going to be responding to what he says during my presentation, my rebuttal period. But if there's anything I don't have time to respond to, then I'd like the Christians to ask me the questions, because every point he just brought up is answerable. I hope I have enough time to answer them all. Now, let's talk about jihad. Now, let me make it clear, when I defend jihad, when I say jihad is justified, I'm not defending terrorism. That doesn't equal meaning I justify 7/7, 9/11, because I condemn those acts. Let's just get that out of the way right now. And the reason I want to make this clear is because in today's present age, we sadly live in an era where the term jihad has been so abused from people of all sides. You have the extremist Muslims on one side, and they're called the jihadis, and they basically want to kill everybody, including the Muslims. And then you have the liberal, moderate Muslims who say we have to reform jihad or get rid of it, which then means there's something wrong with it, because if you have to reform something and get rid of something, it means it's bad. And then you have the non-Muslim who seems to support the interpretation of the jihadis. But the middle people like myself and the vast majority who keep saying jihad doesn't mean any of this, our voices seem to keep getting drowned out. So for starters, what is jihad? Alan gave a short definition, and he was right. It simply means to strive or to struggle in the cause of God. As Alan said, what I'm doing right now is considered a jihad. Someone who quits his addiction to alcohol or smoking or gambling, all of that is considered a jihad. In fact, jihad doesn't mean holy war. We have to make that clear. Now, indeed, Muslims can take up physical jihad, meaning war. They can fight in the cause of God. But we need to examine this, because the Quran explains this issue. So yes, Muslims can fight in the cause of God. But the question is, when can Muslims fight? Can Muslims fight whenever they feel like? Just because you're a non-Muslim, I can come now force you and kill you, or force you to convert to Islam? Is that how it works? Well, Alan also brought the verse up. In Surah 2, verse 190, the Quran says, fight those who fight you. And then also in Surah 22, verse 39 to 40, it says, to those whom war is made against, permission is given to fight back. And there's a ton of more verses that essentially say the same thing, and I can bring up hadiths as well. So basically, Islam makes it clear. Fight those who fight you. If war has been made against you, then you can fight back. Now, it's very important to know that Islam teaches religious tolerance. It teaches religious freedom. In fact, there's one entire surah, Surah 109, devoted to religious freedom. And in Surah 109, it says that the Muslims will not worship what you worship. You're not going to worship what I worship. So each of us to our own way. Now, I know non-Muslims like to say, well, this was in Mecca. Then when the Prophet went to Medina, he became violent. I'm going to address that in a few minutes. And by the way, that's false as well. This is a new distortion that non-Muslims are doing. They want to create this division. Mecca and Medina, two completely different things, when that doesn't exist. Now, for instance, Alan said, you can't force people to a religion. That's not faith. Exactly. For instance, you'll never find a verse like this in the Quran or the Hadiths. Whoever would not seek the Lord God of Israel should be put to death, whether small or great, whether man or woman. That's not in my book, that's in his Bible. So as he said, that's unacceptable. I agree. That is unacceptable, and that's why I don't follow the Bible. So how should Muslims fight? Okay, we know Muslims can fight. Sure, if people fight you, you can fight back. But how are we supposed to fight back? Does it mean we can go bomb buses, fly planes into buildings, kill women and children? Well, the answer is an explicit no. Because in Surah 2, verse 190 to 193, as Alan also mentioned, do not transgress the limits. The Quran says don't transgress the limits. So what does transgressing the limits mean? Well, the Prophet explained it in Bukhari. The book of Bukhari and Muslim, these are basically, we call them hadiths. They're the prophetic traditions of what he said and did, him and his companions, etc. Now in Bukhari, volume 4, book 52, Allah's apostle disapproved the killing of women and children. And the hadith that follows it says the exact same thing. And also in Muslim book, Sahih Muslim, book number 19, 4294, every time the Prophet dispatched an expedition, when he sent out soldiers, he would always tell them, do not kill the children. Do not mutilate the dead bodies. And then we have the right-hand man of the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr. This is his right-hand man. And in Malik Muwatta, another hadith, book number 22, Abu Bakr advised the Muslims 10 things. Do not kill women or children. Do not kill the elderly. Do not kill the handicapped. Do not cut down the fruit-bearing trees. Do not destroy an inhabited place. Do not slaughter the animals except for food. And don't even burn the bees. So notice, when Muslims go to war, we actually have to show consideration for insects. Does that sound like terrorism? And this is the Prophet's right-hand man. Now surely if the Prophet was some evil maniac, then you'd expect his right-hand man to be just as crazy. But this guy's telling you, don't kill innocent people, and don't even kill the animals and the bees. So Muslims are not supposed to act like terrorists. In fact, the Quran in Surah 5, verse 32, this is the famous verse, everybody knows about it. Killing one innocent person is like killing all of humanity. And in fact, it goes even further. Because non-Muslims often say, well, an innocent person means a Muslim. It doesn't mean a non-Muslim. Well, that's interesting. The Prophet Muhammad, in the book of Bukhari, the Prophet said, anybody who kills a non-Muslim, a muwahid, someone who you have peace with, a non-Muslim, if you kill him, you won't smell the fragrance of paradise. So according to our Prophet, if you kill a non-Muslim, an innocent non-Muslim, you don't even go to paradise. So does that sound like terrorism? Can you just go kill whoever you feel like? I don't think so. Now what about peace? Sure, Muslims can fight, but can they just kill everybody until the last one? No, the Quran even says in Surah 2 verse 192 to 193, fight them unless they make peace, then you should stop. In Surah 8 verse 61, but if the enemy inclines towards peace, you incline toward peace and put your trust in God. So in conclusion, all of what I just said is jihad. And everything else has to be interpreted in light of these verses. Not just separate one verse by its own and then ignore everything I just mentioned. So I doubt anybody can have a problem with this, what I just said. As Alan himself said, everybody agrees with this, even atheists. But the thing he doesn't realize is that this is jihad. This is jihad. So I'm happy he said that. So we're on the same page. But now, let's get rid of the misconceptions. Let's get rid of the misconceptions. Surah 9, verse 29, the famous verse that everybody seems to mention, but nobody seems to like to quote the context. I wonder why. In Surah 9:29, it says, fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, etc., etc. Now, as I said, you're supposed to quote a verse, first of all, in its own context as a book, and then you're supposed to quote the verse in its historical context. I mean, as Paul said, I studied creative writing, literature, and I got my degree in that. When we used to analyze texts in class, we would analyze its context and its historical context. Why does the text say that? Nobody just takes one text on its own and draws a conclusion. Nobody does that. Not a single person does that. I don't know who invented this thesis to work like that. So now, let's interpret 929 according to its context as a book. I just quoted you verse after verse, and I could spend 2 hours quoting you other verses which say, fight if you're fought, fight the people who fight you. So therefore, we should apply Surah 929 according to that standard. And guess what? The historical context also supports me. Now, anybody who studies the historical context of verse 929 will know that this verse took place right before the Battle of Tabuk, which was between the Muslims and the Byzantines. What essentially happened was that the Prophet sent messengers, ambassadors to the Byzantine Empire, inviting them to Islam. And these guys are Christians. And what did they do? They killed the messenger. Now back then, if you kill a messenger of a leader, that's like killing the leader himself. Anybody who studies history knows when you kill those messengers, that's a declaration of war. Let me give you an analogy of a present-day situation. Imagine America sent diplomats to Iran, and Iran killed them. What do you think would happen? World War III would begin. So these Christians in Byzantine, they killed these Muslim messengers without any provocation, and this was a declaration of war. So Surah 929 was revealed, which allowed the Muslims to fight them. Guess what? We also have a hadith from that time from a major Muslim scholar, Mujahid, who Muslims know is a very great scholar. He himself said, regarding Surah 929, this is when Muhammad and his companions were ordered to march towards Tabuk. So put it all together, 929 does not support any supposed conquest to just go kill people because they're not Muslims. That is, unless you want to ignore all the context, then of course you can go with that interpretation. Now what about the jizya tax? The jizya tax. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but people say jizya tax is discrimination. Discriminatory taxes exist everywhere based on who you are. For instance, in the West, you pay taxes according to your social structure, according to your class. If you're rich, you pay more. If you're poor, you pay less. But in America, when the Republicans are in charge, the Christians, the conservatives, they actually make the rich pay less and the poor pay more. So this is a tax based on your social structure and on your class. Now people will say, well, that's different. No, it isn't. You're making someone pay something because of his social structure, of his class. Everybody should go research about the class war. For instance, by next year in England, if you make £150,000 or more, you're going to have to pay 50% of what you make to the government. Now, how in the world do you not have a problem with that, but you have a problem with the jizya tax, which is so cheap, historically has been seen to be so cheap, it's not even a problem. So how do you have a problem with that? Furthermore, not everybody has to pay the jizya. The old, the blind, the handicapped, they don't have to pay the jizya. Even if they're rich, the women and children, the poor, even non-Muslims who are fighting with the Muslims don't have to pay the jizya. Now, I want everybody to think of the irony. Think of the irony. Muslims, if they're attacked by a foreign nation, they're allowed to fight back. Nobody has a problem with that. Now, when Muslims take these people over, let's say the Muslims are victorious, the Muslims don't kick these people out of their land. They don't slaughter them all, as many other people do. Instead, the Muslims tell them, okay, you just have to pay a cheap jizya tax, and now we're going to protect you. Do you see the irony? The very same people who started the war on the Muslims are now being protected by the Muslims. If people don't see the irony in that, then there's nothing more to be said. And furthermore, Muslims also have to pay the zakat. And we have to continually, the zakat is just the minimum of what we have to give. We're often told to give in charity. If you're rich, you have to help the state, etc., etc. So the jizya tax can't be used against the Muslims at all. And what about the hadith? The hadith he mentioned, which he didn't mention, but I know which one he's talking about. The Prophet said, I'm commanded to fight people until they say the shahada. Again, context is very important. Now we have a major scholar who's considered to be a radical, Ibn Taymiyyah. How did he interpret this verse? He said that this verse specifically means that this hadith is referring to those people who wage a war against Muslims. So when the Prophet said, I'm commanded to fight people until they convert, when you put it in the context, it's referring to people who start a war with the Muslims when you're in war. In fact, we have a Quranic verse that even backs that up in Surah 8, verse 39. The Quran commands Muslims to fight until there's no oppression and to fight till people have faith in God. Basically, they convert to Islam. But yet, if anybody studies the context of this verse, it was revealed during the time of the Battle of Badr in a war context. So that hadith doesn't help Alan's case, it just helps mine, because the hadith was related to defensive war. Now, what about the peace in Mecca? You remember I mentioned peace only happens in Mecca. Okay, we have Medina verses, Surah 5, verse 99, which says, Allah says, the messenger's duty is but to proclaim the message. Your message is to only say the message. It doesn't say your message is to say the message, and if they refuse it, you kill them all. And in Surah 3, verse 20, this is also revealed in Medina. So if they dispute with you, say, I have submitted myself to God, as to those, the same with the people who follow me, and say to the people of the book, and those who are unlearned, do you submit yourself to God? If they do, they are in the right guidance, but if they turn back, your duty is to only convey the message. So here we have it again, religious freedom in Medina, not just Mecca. And when you put it all together, Islam teaches religious tolerance. Now, let me respond to other misconceptions he didn't bring up much about jihad text, which I have prepared, but he brought up paradise in Islam, which I don't see how is a bad thing. Paradise in Islam is something that happens in the afterlife. It doesn't affect none of you, so that's not really an issue. Now, that argument, for starters, the paradise in Islam, that's a purely emotional argument. Oh, you're going to have sex in paradise with all these women? You're going to drink booze when it's actually not booze, as the Quran even says. You don't get bad health effects. It's not alcohol. I want a logical reason as to why that's wrong. I challenge any Christian, tell me one logical reason as to why that's wrong. I see some people shaking their heads, but tell me, how did you come to this planet? Did your parents just talk with each other? How did they? Didn't they have sex with each other? It seems Christians, and I'm not shy to say this, it seems Christians are shy about having sex. That's the main problem. Sex in paradise, that's so bad. Well, why is it bad? I mean, in the Christian paradise, you're just going to sit there, worship God, and dress in white, and okay, so are we. We're going to do that, but we also get pleasures, and we're not shy of any of that. But that doesn't mean you go kill innocent people now to just get those rewards, because Islam doesn't teach that. And another point, Alan said Muhammad is different from Jesus. He is, because when Jesus was preaching his message, he wasn't even in a position of power to even raise an army. He was always running away from his own people. And he only preached for 3 years. The Prophet Muhammad preached for 13 years without any violence, taking all the heat. So that makes Muhammad double what Jesus did in the gospel. And now, sure, Muhammad isn't like Jesus, and he sure isn't like Moses. What did Moses do in the Old Testament? Killing entire towns. In fact, there's verses in the Old Testament that says when you go to war, don't even show these people mercy. Kill them all. It actually says that. If you want the verse, I'll bring it up. While in Islam it says, if you go to war with people who start a war with you, and if you happen to conquer them, then don't even kill them all, just make them pay the jizya. And another point, early Islamic scholarship separated non-Muslims into 4 categories, by the way. You had the non-Muslims living in the Islamic State who had to pay the jizya. You had the non-Muslims who visit the Islamic State as a tourist or for business. They don't have to pay the jizya. You had the third category, who the Muslims were at war at, a foreign nation they were at war at. And you had the fourth category, non-Muslims who are at peace with the Muslims and they don't have to pay the jizya. So no, not all non-Muslims have to simply pay the jizya, submit or pay the jizya.
5 minutes.
Yeah. And you have to make this point clear, because people keep twisting and saying, if you don't pay the jizya, even if you live in Switzerland, Islam is going to come take over, when that's not the case. Now let's respond to some other verses that people often bring up. Alan didn't bring them up, but I'll just bring them up anyway. In Surah 8, verse 60, I'm sure probably you've heard of these before. Surah 8, verse 60, the Quran says, against the non-believers, make ready your strength to the utmost of your power, make yourself ready against them in war, and strike terror into their hearts. So here you have a verse from the Quran that says, get ready to make war with the non-believers and strike terror into their hearts. So that must prove Islam are allowed to commit terrorism. That is unless if you quote the context, which starts from verse 56 all the way to verse 61. And this is what it says. They are those with whom you made a covenant, but they break their covenant every time. So once again, we have another Quranic verse that allows Muslims to go to war, but the verse makes itself clear that the people you're going to war with are people who broke their covenants. And if you study the historical context of this verse, you notice that these people were known as the hypocrites and people who were waging a war against the Muslims. And another point, Alan said, according to his understanding, that you can't force people to, you can't expand your religion, you can't force people to your religion. But why doesn't the Pope, who started the Crusades, have that same theology? Why is that? Now, I don't want to get into this game of saying Alan says this and that Christian said that. The reason why I'm doing that and saying this is because I'm not responsible for what Muslims did throughout history. I'm not responsible for what Tariq did when he went to Spain. I'm more concerned about what the Prophet Muhammad did, what his companions did, what the Quran said, and what the Hadith said. That's my basis. I judge everything else based on that, not what people did 700 years later, etc., etc. If Alan wants to debate the history of Islamic conquests, etc., etc., that in itself would take 3 hours, and I would recommend him to debate my colleague Adnan Rashid, who's far more equipped when it comes to these historical conquests and topic, which quite frankly don't have much to do with the text that I'm bringing up. So what Alan has to do is he has to first attack the prime sources. He has to build it from there and move to there, not move from there all the way back. It doesn't work like that. You see, what I'm telling you, I'm building a consistent argument that follows a consistent pattern. Everything I'm saying follows the same line. But if you listen to the critics, what they say doesn't follow anything. So Muslims can go out, fight, kill everybody they want, yet we have all those other verses which say you can't. So doesn't something seem to be a bit distorted here? You have a chain that's going on, but then everything falls apart. So, and a last point. My friend here, Paul, who's being a neutral moderator, he's a Muslim. Now, last I remember, nobody put a sword or a gun to his head, forcing him to convert to Islam. Neither did anyone do that to my other friend, Abdullah. And by the way, most members of the MDI, Muslim Debate Initiative, happen to be converts to Islam. I'm actually the minority. I'm actually one of the only ones who was born a Muslim. All of them converted to Islam. Now, did anybody put a gun to your head when you converted? Did anybody put a gun to your head when you... So that statement is false, it's condescending, and it assumes that Muslims only convert to Islam because someone comes and put a sword to your head. What about the early Muslims in Mecca who had nothing? They were being oppressed by their own people. In fact, the pagans were putting swords to their necks to come back to paganism, but they refused, and my time is up.
Thank you both, Sami and Alan, for your opening presentations. Just to remind you what's going to happen next. We're going to have a break for approximately 5 minutes. There's free tea and coffee and biscuits at the back. Ladies' toilets are up the stairs, men's down the stairs. You can go out the door here, turn right. After the break, there will be a rebuttal session. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to rebut the other side. And then after that, it's your opportunity to ask questions and make comments. So, see you shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Am I on? Can you hear me?
No, not yet.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed, Sami. It was good to hear your contribution. I was concerned quite a significant part of your 25 minutes that you were given by Paul was spent in what I can only call as tilting windmills, creating arguments in order to destroy them, but they're arguments that you create. You notice, for instance, I never once mentioned the word terrorism. You were determined to bring it in, and you were determined to poo-poo it and deal with it and so on, and I probably would agree with much of what you said. This debate, to me, is not about terrorism. This debate is about jihad. I think there are a number of different issues that we need to look at. I noticed, for instance, Sami mentioned a couple of times about the Old Testament and the compelling of people and the fighting in the Old Testament. I think you need to really go and talk to the Jewish people about that. I'm a Christian, and I come from a Christian viewpoint. Let's be absolutely clear, we live in New Testament times. The Old Testament is only useful insofar as it points to Jesus Christ, who is the final word of God, the very Son of God who came to earth. That is the purpose of the Old Testament. I therefore read the Old Testament, I recognise it as the Word of God, but not as a flat, mechanical, wooden thing that I work my way through, as literally applicable to me now, today. I don't, for instance, believe in stoning homosexuals. But actually, because it points to Jesus Christ, and then Jesus Christ came as the culmination and the fullness of time, came as the peak of God's revelation. And that is when we move into New Testament time. God expects us to grow up, no longer to be subject to the rules and regulations of the law of the Old Testament, but to live in the New Testament, to live in relationship with Him. That relationship that Jesus Christ opened. He opened the heavens for us, that we may be living in a living relationship with Him. So actually saying there were wars in the Old Testament, yes, I freely acknowledge that the Old Testament is more bloody and more full of wars and battles than the Quran. But that's not what we're talking about. I'm a Christian, I said that right from the beginning. And I don't believe that's what's relevant or appropriate today. It's what Jesus Christ says, what Jesus Christ teaches, what Jesus Christ did. That's the important thing. To give that living relationship between me and God and open that up to all people and to all mankind. Now, one or two other things that that Sami mentioned. He referred, as I did, to Surah 9:29. He was talking about the jizya tax and trying to justify jizya tax in terms of the taxes that Bush and the Republican Americans, I didn't really follow his argument. Let's be clear about jizya tax. It's not the money. Jizya tax is about submission. Jizya tax is about Islam telling you will pay your tax, you Christian, that's me. You will pay it with submission, with humiliation. That's what you'll do. It's not the tax itself. It's not whatever to do with the money, whether it's £10 or 100 or £5, whatever it is. That's not the point. The point is that is what Islam is saying. You will either convert to Islam, or you will submit and pay the jizya tax with humiliation, or you'll die. I don't think God's like that. I really don't think God's like that. I don't think God's like that about anybody, if I'm honest. This humiliation, I don't think He's actually there for putting people above others. He's there for pulling down the proud. He's down there for pulling down the powerful. That's what God is in Jesus Christ. So all those who are busy imposing, being powerful and strutting around and demanding humiliation, get out of my way, move to the side as I come along, insisting on all the humiliation that goes with it. No, that's not God's way. That really is not God's way. Sami didn't like me referring to Spain. He said, well, the particular incident of Spain, and said, well, we can't look at history. I think he put that in the context of, well, what the Pope says or something. I'm not here to defend the Pope. I have huge admiration for aspects of the Roman Catholic Church, but I'm not a Catholic. And I don't believe in that form of Christianity as appropriate. It certainly isn't New Testament Christianity, although I say I have huge respect for aspects of the Roman Catholic Church and their teaching. And I see very good Christians within the Roman Catholic Church. The reason why I referred to this incident from Spanish history, it wasn't many hundreds of years, it was some 90 years after the death of Muhammad. And I was trying to refer back to the foundational period of Islam. I fully acknowledge we can't sit here with a tit-for-tat argument about 2,000 years worth of Christian history and 1,400 years worth of Islamic history. That's not what I want to do. But we have to go back to the foundations. I want to go back always to Jesus Christ and the New Testament, and perhaps a period after that, but that's basically the period. And I would want to go back to the life of Muhammad, the Sunnah, the Hadith, the Quran, and what is generally accepted by Muslims to be that original four caliphs and that original golden period of Islam, and see what was the practice there. That's the foundation, so that's where I'm going. I'm not referring to history, I'm not referring to the slaughter of 1.5 million Armenians by the Sultan in 1915 or thereabouts, or any of those sort of things, because they can be debated. They're always open to interpretation. But I want to go back to the origins and so on. But what Sami didn't answer, and this is about 5 minutes, so I need to start drawing up, what Sami didn't tackle at all is whether he accepted what I defined as offensive jihad. That is what I was looking for in this original foundation period of Islam, when Islam spread like a rocket. There's never been anything like it before, as far as I can see. Possibly Alexander the Greek moves as fast. But Islam moved as a rocket. Moved 100 years. It moved right from India across to Spain. Moved like a rocket. And it did so only by way of offensive jihad. It could only do that. As I said earlier, the Hindus didn't know anything about Islam. But Islam spread, and that was offensive. And it was imposing Islam. It was taking over the heights, the social heights. It was taking over power in all those places. I'll be the first to acknowledge that it didn't always, often, insist that people converted there and then. What they did insist on doing was taking over town by town, city by city, the political power. They wanted to dominate. They wanted to control. It was about command and control by the hordes of Islam. That is the offensive Islam. And I happen to think, personally, it's not only offensive jihad, it is offensive. And in my view, it will stink in the eyes of God, of those who are doing it in the eyes of God. And this is where we now get down to the crux of the nub of the matter, in my view. I'm actually talking about, is it actually Islam willing to own up to this? Why will Islam own up to this? Offensive jihad as some intrinsic part of Islam. Islam, religion, as saying earlier, and Sami didn't touch this, religion is not about controlling people's lives. It's not about dominating them. It's not about demanding submission. It's about that open heaven. It's about that living relationship with God. For Christians, a living relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. That love that you have for your Maker. And that love which he pours into you. That Heavenly Father up there. That's what it's about. That is what faith and religion and belief is about. It's not about imposing people. It's not about controlling people. Sami didn't deal with that at all. And yet this is the essence of the thing. This is my problem with jihad in Islam. If you, as Muslims, and Muslims here said, actually, we believe that jihad is not part of, offensive jihad is not part of Islam, I say right on. Christianity has had its own reformation. Time for your reformation. Cast it out, because it simply is offensive and it's not acceptable. When you turn to religion, it is that your relationship with your Maker. If I've got time, yes, I've just got 2 minutes. I just want to deal with this matter of paradise. We got the usual thing, didn't we, from Sami about Christians have a problem with sex. Talking about paradise. My problem with paradise, as described, with all these rivers of wine, and I acknowledge it says you don't get a headache and you don't get drunk with the rivers of wine and rivers of water and rivers of honey, I think, and these 40 virgins. What's it about sex? People liking sex. 70 virgins. 70, that's some amount of sex in my view. But it's the sheer carnality of it. There's very, very little. In fact, there's nothing about your relationship in paradise with God. That's my problem with paradise. This intensely carnal, physical, material religion that I can force people into Islam, or at least I force their societies into Islam. And if I die on the way, I'm offered these virgins, I'm offered these the fruits, I'm offered this wine and so on. It's just so carnal. My friends, this is not what faith is about. It's about a loving God who wants to have a relationship with you and with me. Ultimately, it's about Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ to open that way to heaven that we can have that. Not to force one another, but willing of heart. Like that relationship I mentioned about my daughter and myself when she sits in my lap. That is what it's about. So when I pray, I'm not scared. I can stand boldly before that throne of grace. I can stand boldly before him because of what he's done for me and have that praying, worshipping, loving relationship with him. And go about my daily life doing it. No sword, no compulsion, no virgins to entice me, no rivers of wine, no, none of this carnality, none of this sensuality, no, spiritual, religious, relationship and love. Now you notice Sami didn't tackle that at all. I'm sorry he didn't tackle it. Islam must tackle this, because this is the essence of what faith is about. And while it's about offensive jihad, or even while offensive jihad is part of Islam, an acknowledged part of jihad, of Islam, then this is the Achilles heel, and it undermines your religion. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm glad Alan brought up the relationship with God, because I forgot to address that. Alan brought up a nice story about his daughter, and that is a nice story. I want that for myself one day. But what he forgot to mention with God, what if you don't go sit on God's lap? Where is he going to send you according to the Bible? What if you reject a relationship with God? What happens? That's not, ladies and gentlemen, when a man and wife are in a relationship and they separate, the husband doesn't go send her to hell or imprison her for eternity. So according to the Bible, if you reject God, and many Christian scholars, not just my own opinion, if you reject God, if you're not a Christian, as many Christians always say, Jesus is the way, the truth, the light, and if you reject that, you're going to hell. Amen. As many have told me. So how in the world is that an open heaven? Christianity doesn't teach everybody goes to heaven. It doesn't. So when he's telling you something nice, But that's not Christianity. That's his own made-up version, which doesn't come from the Bible, which doesn't come from many major Christian scholars. So I agree. And in fact, he says something, he contradicted himself. He said, the Old Testament is a Jewish book. It's the Word of God. But then he said, God's not like that. He doesn't force people to convert. Well, in the Old Testament he did. He's your God. You said it's the Word of God, but then you said God isn't like that. Which God are you talking about? Is the God of the Old Testament your God? Or is he some different God? You said God doesn't work like that. And then you said the Old Testament is the Word of God. In the Old Testament, God says if you don't accept Him, in 2 Chronicles, kill everybody. Therefore, you're against your own God. And a last point to do with this. We often hear about Judeo-Christian values. Well, why do you call them Judeo-Christian values when it seems you get rid of every Judeo aspect? That's what I want to... He said he's against stoning homosexuals. Well, that's a Judeo value. So why do Christians emptily call themselves Judeo value Christians? It doesn't make sense. So he just has to own up to the fact that his God, the one he believes in the Old Testament, was killing countless of people for not going to that religion. Now another point about offensive jihad. I never said there's no such thing as offensive jihad. In fact, I gave you verse after verse which said Muslims can fight back. Muslims can go fight another people if they fight you. And now he wants to talk about all these conquests. As I said, each conquest has its own specific context. Like the Byzantines. The major war with the Byzantines that went to North Africa. Why did it begin? Because the Byzantines started it for starters. So it led to a major war that the Muslims kept taking over Byzantine land to get rid of them. And here's another interesting fact. Christians welcomed them in. And you see, each conquest has a long story. You'd need one whole debate on this topic by itself. So yes, Islam did spread around many places. But what he fails to tell you, it didn't just spread around because they felt like that's a nice land for us, we should just go take it over. Each situation had a context, and whenever you examine it, there happened to be a war with a neighboring empire. And those people who the Muslims fought, those weren't some nice people. Those were oppressors, dictators, killing their own people. And that's why they accepted the Muslims. And today those people are Muslims. They weren't forced to convert. Where are you going to kick all these people out? All those people. Why are the oldest churches in the Middle East? They didn't convert. Nobody forced them to convert. So something doesn't follow along. So that's the answer. I addressed it in my first opening statement. And so again, and I repeat, debate my colleague on a 3-hour debate on this topic. I'm primarily dealing with the text. As you said, you're not here to defend the Pope. I'm not here to defend Tariq. I'm here to defend the Prophet Muhammad and his companions who never initiated a war without provocation. And that's a fact. Now, what else? What else did he bring up? It's true, he didn't say jihad is terrorism. I never said he did. I was addressing arguments that people make against jihad because I want to get rid of those misconceptions. So indeed. And then he says, we got the usual from Sami about paradise. Well, we got the usual from Alan about Muslim paradise. It's so carnal. We have a relationship with God. So do we. How does having sex in paradise mean you don't have a relationship with God? You see, it's fine if you Christians don't like it, but you have to give a logical reason as to why it's wrong. Don't just say, because I'm a Christian, that's what I believe, you're wrong. I don't do that. When I attack Christianity, I don't just say, well, because it disagrees. I logically go against it. I don't just say, well, this says that, you say that, therefore you're wrong. So that's the usual from the Christian, trying to impose their mind view, their set of values, whatever it is, because his value is obviously different from the conservatives in America. So you want to impose your way and say that this is wrong without offering any logical reason. And if you notice, we're hardly spending any time on jihad, on the text of jihad. Did you notice that? I brought up so many texts, and I want him to do the same. We're talking about spirituality. He said, Sami didn't mention anything about that. This debate is about jihad. If he wants to debate on spirituality in Christianity and Islam, we can have that. If he wants to have a debate on, is Jesus really the one to save you, we can have that on another day. But right now we're talking about jihad. And he's not bringing up any verses to back up his points. I brought up all the verses in this debate. He brought up 929. And as we saw, 929 doesn't help his case at all. And then he brought up the jizya. It seems he ignored what I said. Didn't the early Muslims, as I said, separate the non-Muslims into 4 categories? Did he just conveniently ignore that part, that not all non-Muslims have to pay the jizya? And then did he ignore the part when I brought up the social structure? He said it's not about the money. Exactly, that's why I brought up the class. It's about who they are. I made that clear. It's about who they are. Just like the jizya, it's about who you are. Secondly, he says it's about humiliating them. Muslims are actually taught, when you collect the money from the non-Muslims, don't force them. Don't tell them, where's my money? Don't hit them. Tell it in a nice way. Now compare that with the IRS or these tax groups in your Judeo-Western Christian values. So no, it wasn't submission. Those people, I repeat again, happily accepted it. And here's another thing. Muslims actually told those people, don't pay jizya tax, because sometimes the Muslims couldn't fulfill their obligations, so the other side didn't have to pay the jizya. So the jizya works both ways. And let me repeat, he also forgot the irony. These are people who started a war with the Muslims. The Muslims go into their land and they say, okay, you know what? You don't have to convert. You don't have to die. You don't have to leave. You can stay in your land. Keep your culture, whatever, your religion, your churches. The oldest churches are still in the Muslim world. You can keep all of that, but you pay a jizya, and now we're going to protect you. The very same people who wanted to kill us, we're protecting you now. And of course, he ignores all of that. So again, you have no case on jizya. Nothing at all. And I think that was basically it. What else should I bring up? There's nothing else to respond to. But that's it. I'm trying to find something to respond to, and that's it. That's all his points.